There we go.
All right. Yay. Okay, so we are both live on Zoom webinar. We are live on the Character Strong Facebook page. So exciting to have people joining. We are a minute early, so we'll let people kind of come in. We already have, we're going to probably hit our max on Zoom very quickly. We just went over 300 live in the room. If you would, we're almost over 400 now live in the room. Introduce yourself in the chat, if you would, whether you are on Facebook Live. It'd be great to introduce yourself. Where are you watching from? Or if you're in Zoom, find that chat feature below. We're almost at our max immediately here, coming up on 500 live on Zoom webinar, which is awesome. Thank you everybody for joining. It must be a hot topic, relaunching schools after COVID-19. And we're excited to dig into this important topic. I'm seeing, gosh, it's going so fast.
It's going so fast.
Washington, Missouri, Boston. Oh my goodness, Texas, Bonnie Lake, right up the road from where I am, Wisconsin again. Oh my goodness, Vegas. I'm just trying to keep track. Alberta, Canada. New Jersey. Dane from Kansas. I saw you there, Dane. Kentucky.
I saw howdy from Texas.
I love it. Bellevue, Tacoma, Maine. South Carolina. Okay, I want one of our team members who's on the back end to try to count up the total number of states that you're seeing and or provinces and or countries. If it goes beyond US, Canada, it'd be fun to have that maybe as a fun piece at the end. Coos Bay, Oregon, Tennessee, Arizona.
I saw Iowa.
This is great.
Indiana.
San Francisco Bay Area. Hey, Zoom says you can't have more than 500, Krista, but we got 506 in the room right now. That's great. Breaking the rules.
Hopefully we'll break Zoom.
Well, this is great. Keep putting your where you're watching from, and know that that chat area is also where you can put any questions throughout. We don't want to waste any time. Let me briefly introduce, and then I'll let them introduce themselves. Our webinar partners today, Dr. Bella Bukowski, Dr. Lori Linus, two people who are just doing amazing work, have done amazing work for quite some time, are sought after in many different areas. And that's why we were so honored that they've come together for a second webinar. It was so well received. And I'll start with this, the last one that we had. I had a follow-up, both Bella and Lori, that I thought was so, to me, it was special. And the last one, not only were they just taken back, it was two behavior specialists from a district in Texas who multiple times when I was on a call with them the next week were saying how they were like literally standing up during the webinar, wanting to clap because it was speaking their heart language, right?
Yes.
But the other thing that they said that really made them want more, like I need to connect with these people, was the authenticity. And I thought it was special. Bella, they said, when you talked about having a 3-year-old who at times was driving you crazy, right? And they said, and John, where you were doing like this really early in the morning shift because you have to like switch with your wife because you both have to work during the day, and you have a 5-year-old, they're like, those are my people. They're real, they're authentic. We all are going through this. And they were just saying how much they appreciated that. So I wanted to make sure both of you heard that. That was a big deal to them. As we get into relaunching schools after COVID-19, I'll let you take it away from here.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bella, why don't you take it first?
Yeah, sure. I can start. I'm Bella. And as John said, it has been incredible to be able to partner with Character Strong. We all have such a strong passion for the same things. And that comment about the 3-year-old, she's going to be 4 on Thursday, but our house is insane right now. We're putting our house on the market in Seattle. The carpets are being ripped up. She's running around everywhere. I'm sweating trying to get ready for this webinar this morning. That was me. And I finally got here. I'm still hot from trying to get here. But I'm here, and I'm Bella. And I do a lot of work across our state, in Montana, across Montana. Lori and I have also done some work in some districts in California as well, all around the scale up of MTSS. And I guess my area of real expertise is I'm also a mental health clinician. And so I have a private practice here in Seattle as well. I see kids, I see their families, young adults. So I really bring that trauma-informed mental health lens into schools. Before any of this, I was a school counselor as well for a few different districts here in Washington. And I have to do a shout out. I'm seeing all these things come in. I went to school in North Carolina, so I saw a few of you pop in there. Woo, woo. I'm so happy that you're on here. Thank you. Go ahead, Lori.
All right. So Lori Linus, I was joking last time that sometime last year I hit over 1,000 schools, and I've worked with 100 districts and 4 state departments of ed. So as you think about your questions, as you're seeing this, please ask, follow up with us. There's probably nothing we haven't seen at this point in school, so let us know. I would say my other piece, my background is special education. When I was teaching in the classroom, working with students with emotional behavioral. And then my other hat I would say I always wear is I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. As John knows, when I jumped on this morning, it was the Death Star Zoom background image on from one of my kids. But you know, you name it, Star Wars, D&D, comics, I do it all. So there you go.
We share that Star Wars love.
Yeah. Do you want to mention to it that if their colleagues, because I saw someone was just emailing me saying, I can't get on, it's full, that they can get on Facebook Live?
Yeah, let's mention that. Yeah, if yeah, and I think Krista maybe who is listening as well, there might be a way to let people know, because it looks like we've hit the max actually at 506, which is weird, that they can go to the Character Strong Facebook page. And right now it is streaming live. We've got over 40 people live there as well. So if you want to email them, but also Krista hopefully can send a message to people.
Yeah, great. All right, so we'll jump in. You know, when we think about the minute that we realized schools were closing down, we started thinking about, okay, what's the impact this is going to have? What is it going to look like when we need to reopen? What happens next year if we get into the fall and we don't reopen, or we have ongoing opening and closings, you know, and all of that looks like there's possibilities for every scenario. We know when we think about those multi-tiered systems of support, things are going to have to be stronger than ever. And right now things feel really messy. That's why last time we wanted to start first with touching on trauma and the impacts that this is having on your staff, your families, your kids. And now coming into thinking about all that, what does this mean for our systems and how we build up? I love the funny things I keep seeing around people trying to homeschool their kids. So this one says, I've been homeschooling a 6 and 8-year-old for 1 hour and 11 minutes. Teachers deserve to make $1 billion a year, or maybe a week. And then this is my favorite, homeschool day 1, wondering how I can get this kid transferred out of my class. I saw one that popped up the other day that said, teachers kept saying my student's a pleasure to have in class, and I no longer agree. So when we think about all these things, right, and it's reality, after I get off this, I'm going to be running up and teaching ancient civilizations to my 12-year-old. We're all in the thick of this right now. When we look at our systems, and all of these pieces fall under that multi-tiered systems. One of the things we see a lot is that schools say, well, now we're focused on SCL, so we're really kind of pushing out PBIS, or we're bringing in restorative justice, so now we're not going to do SCL. All of these things have to be in there, right? There's a place for all of these things, and all of them have a role in how we strengthen our systems. And that systems is primarily about adults change so the kids can change, right? So systems building, but putting a lens on all of these pieces. Now, when we walk you through these pieces and we walk you through a sample 6-week plan, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, right? If you're kind of starting at ground zero, you're not going to be able to put every piece in place, but we're going to talk about assessing what you do have and then deciding which next step makes the most sense for you as we examine all these pieces. Some of you joining your schools are pretty far ahead. And so what you're looking at is really just refining and tweaking some of these pieces for that stronger start. So we're going to first start and just talk about this trauma responsiveness. And Bella's going to lead us through this section.
All right. So when we think about, you know, as Lori just mentioned, when this all started coming to head, really thinking about, I know for myself, I was like, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be okay. I think and then we just started hearing more, and then we were getting more, and the numbers were getting higher. And as I'm seeing all this happen, I'm thinking, there's just no way that schools can shut down. What about all those kids that, right, they're not going to be able to learn at home? Like, what's going to happen with their families? And it's just going to become such a giant mess for everybody. And sure enough, that is where we're at. And one of the problems with this pandemic is the open-endedness of it. We have no idea when. We can hope and we can look at the data daily, but we have no idea. So we could restart and then have to go virtual again 2 months later. We just have no idea, it speaks to the importance of what Lori just said. Having these systems in place to help support kids it's always been important. It just knocked up about 10 times the amount of importance that it is for us to be able to help respond to and it's fourfold. It's to our kids, it's to our families, it's to our community, and it's to our teachers. Everyone is going to be affected by this and is affected by this in different ways. So when we think about kids coming back into our building, let's just talk about that for a minute. When we think about the different behaviors that we see, I give a couple like full day workshops on trauma. So I'm gonna just try to keep it real narrow here, really thinking about day to day when kids come to our schools with trauma, the different behaviors and challenges that we might see. You can see them listed here. And you can see this trauma uninformed view. I spend my life, and I will continue to fight for those students who show up in the non-typical ways. I will continue to fight for them because there is always a reason kids are showing up the way that they're showing up, right? And until you dig, until you really get to know, you have no idea. So when kids show up with anger, when kids show up choosing, and if you can't see me, I'm putting my air quotes up, choosing to act out, I will fight tooth and nail. No kid chooses to act out, never. When they show up uncontrollable, destructive, non-responsive, there is always a reason, right? So thinking about that trauma uninformed view, and now making a little bit of a paradigm shift to more of a trauma informed view. I'm not gonna read through this list, but you can take a look at that. And what I'm gonna say here is when kids show up in the way that I just mentioned, the first thing you can be thinking, and they're going to show up like this when they come back from school, or when they come back to school, they will show up like this, and adults will too. Your mind should think one thing: fight, flight, or freeze. They are protecting themselves. Their brains are going into fight, flight, or freeze. That response that helps me feel safe. This is really unstable. This is really, really unsafe, unstructured, all of this. And again, the open-endedness of it makes it even worse, right? So when kids show up at school, you should just plan that you're going to see a large number of students who are going to be dysregulated, who are going to be anxious, who are going to have memory challenges. They're going to be sad. They're going to feel sad. Right? So how are we setting up our systems ahead of time? I know Lori and I and John are working with schools. I am so busy in May working with schools on planning plan A when we come back live in person, and plan B, if we come back in the fall and we're not live, what does it look like virtually? We're working like crazy with schools to plan that right now. Plan ahead and really take that trauma-informed lens when you plan ahead, and just know that kids are gonna show up and adults are gonna show up messy. I'm putting together right now a tier 1 and tier 2 document of MTSS and the different things that you should cover with one of my colleagues. And in August, here's what you should do for students, but here's what before you can even do that, here's what you should do for staff. Mm-hmm. And you got to get them talking, circle up. Like we do a lot of trainings on restorative practices, circle up and talk. And it's going to be really uncomfortable, and people are going to cry, and that's what they need because they haven't had the space to be able to do that. I'm running, just like everybody else, I'm running lots of webinars this through the weeks. And I did one last week in Montana, and I asked the question, how are you doing? And several people responded in tears. And they need to be able to respond because this is hard. So now thinking about our responses on the bottom, the uniformed response, when we have a trauma uninformed view, and we think about our uniformed responses, oftentimes it's we need to jump this kid up the triangle and give them, we need to get them into testing for a 504, or we need an evaluation of some sort. You're not, number one, you should never do that. That's the first thing. But number two, you are definitely not going to be able to do that when we come back. So taking more of a trauma-informed lens, and this is why I love Character Strong curriculum. I tell everyone that I train, it doesn't matter what I'm training on, if you do not have a solid social emotional learning curriculum in your building that you are implementing with fidelity and teachers are running it and everyone is involved, that is your number one step. It's your number one step, because students need to learn those skills to regulate, and a lot of them don't. And I can speak to that because I'm a clinician. I work with families, I work with kids all the time. A lot of them do not have those skills. So there's no better place to be able to deliver this than in schools. So thinking about the idea of grief in this process as well. I read this awesome article recently from the Harvard Business Review, and we can send it to you guys, around, and I thought it was brilliant. I had a mom email me 2 weeks ago, and she's like, listen, Dax, his name is Dax, he is really struggling, and he's up and he's down, he's a 7th grader, and he is just really missing the connection with his friends. He is really, and so I did a little digging, and I did a little reading, and I came across this article, and I was like, yes, of course. Name this as grief. This is grief. And the hard part about this is there's several kinds of grief in what people are experiencing. Complete overhaul of any consistency, any structure, any predictability, any routines that people have. Not being connected with the people that they normally are, right? People aren't used to this collective type of grief. So what we need right now, this is a great time to stock up on compassion, right? And as an educator, how do I stock up on compassion? I take care of myself first, and I name it for myself first, right? You can go through the stages of grief. Where am I in that? I'll have some people that are like, I'm good, like I feel really good, I'm solid. And I have some people that I'm really, really struggling. So name it for yourself. Talk about it with your staff, so then you can help name it with kids. It is the most powerful thing when you can name what it is that you see, and being able to name it as grief. And then the next step is to just simply validate. This is so hard. You don't have to solve any problems. This is so hard. And I know it's hard. That's what's going to help everybody to feel a little bit more stable. Yeah. And then if you think about, you can go to the next slide, but if you think about any grief, I mean, it's grief just having to deal with this, but if families and homes have lost people due to this, I think about my whole family lives in New York. I don't know when I'm going to be able to see them again. I have lots of friends in North Carolina because I lived there for 4 years. I don't know when I'm going to be able to see them. I go back to North Carolina a couple times a year. On top of that, if we've lost someone, right, just dealing with this in general, but all of the pieces, the variables that come with it, it's going to be really hard. So final thought from me before Lori takes over is really thinking about, and it just goes back to what Lori had said, what systems do you have in place? What will your school's main, what are you going to do when you get back to school? What is your school's main mission going to be that's connected to the social, emotional, and educational success of kids? And I'm going to tell you right now, I cannot say it enough. You're going to have to talk about this. The worst thing that you can do is start school and not have any conversation with your kids about what we've all gone through. That's the worst thing that you can do. So when you think about your school's mission, right, what is it that you can pull from there and you can really put on the ground and you can really practice with these kids to help them problem solve? Like, first and foremost, we did a mental health training a couple weeks ago, a webinar. First and foremost, get every kid to make a 5-point scale so they can name where they're at, and we all have collective system that we're using to say where it is that we're at. Let's make our 5-point scale, and let's talk about what we do when we're in the different numbers. So what are you going to do to help stay consistent and really dig into your school's mission to recognize the trauma that people are feeling?
Yeah, and if you haven't seen that before, if you just Google the incredible 5-point scale, you'll see examples. It's very easy to put together for kids and for staff. right? And this ties right into how are we creating that, really that ethos of emotional safety and care for our kids, right? And how do we do that with our social emotional learning, you know, standard curriculum, but also our practices? When we look at well-regulated adults, this quote's from Brene Brown, who Bella and I both adore. I really want her to come and like teach me and be my mentor. But you know, transformational leaders and teachers have a deep understanding of their own emotional landscape and the landscape of others, right? So really being able to know yourself first and foremost. So we're going to talk about that, because you need to start back with your staff and make sure that their social and emotional learning is very high too, before we can expect them to develop it for their kids, right? If we look at Character Strong and that theory of change, right, we're going school-wide. So this is something that's, when we say it's good for the adults need to go through it and practice it. This is not, social emotional learning is when the counselor comes in and I take a 20-minute break and go make copies in the copy room, right? This is where I'm doing it and I'm living it with my kids, and we as the staff are modeling it first. Those of you who are on the call and are administrators, this is about how do you right now start to take care of your teachers so that they can take care of the kids, right? So if that's not a focus of yours right now, make that a focus. The adults have to get in and really model those relationship practices. And, you know, at that tier 1, that character is practicing. And when I went through the Character Strong program, one of the key things I wrote away is just that repetition, right? And we talk about this all the time, where it's just about that kind of relentless, gentle pressure and coming back again and again to the things that work. And then how do we get student leadership and that student voice in the process? Social emotional learning is not about doing something to kids, it's about doing something with kids. So how do we switch that lens? A couple of things I'll give you that you can just walk away with now and do, again, hopefully first with your adults so that they can turn around and do it with your kids, is can you really start to name it? So Bella was already talking about this. Do I know where I'm at in this process? Can I really start to put some language around how I'm doing? Do I do those continual check-ins? I know for myself, one day I do feel really good. And then last week a sad commercial came on and I'm in tears crying. And I know I can recognize that is all the stress that's going on right now, and know where that's coming from. But my kids don't recognize it as much, right? So I have to help them to get in and start to pause, check in, name it. And then we'll talk about this strategy called the feel-good plan. So this is just one that our colleague Cher uses a lot in her practice. She's also a trauma therapist as well. But just the emoji feeling chart, because this is everybody really knows this now. All of our kids are really equipped with understanding the emojis, right? So can we get them to really name how they're feeling? And once they name it, what's their plan? So creating something like a feel-good plan for adults, we can call this the Bliss list, right? So it depends on the age of kids we might be working with. And you can see there's a bunch of examples here. Some of these are kids' plans and some of these are adults' plans. And as you're looking at, I mean, you can start to kind of see which one's which, but these should be strategies that everybody can use. We suggest on everyone's plan is something around deep breathing, because we know the breath is a great way to regulate our system, and something that has to do with movement. So we want to get people up, get them out of their chairs. If they're laying in bed feeling bad, we want them to get them out of the bed, really getting them up, moving. We say for the students, the one thing that shouldn't be on the list is screens, because yes, they might think, oh, I'll just feel better if I watch a quick show, but we actually know from regulation that can actually heighten our emotions. And for our adults, you know, removing any type of ice. So it's not about drinking a giant glass of wine or anything else. We want things that when we finish with, we'll also still feel good about ourselves. So quick things that you can do. up on our fridge, we all have our feel-good plan. And so as my kids are starting to feel stressed, then we can say, okay, go to your feel-good plan and pick something out that you can do. The other thing is really setting boundaries. And I find right now from people, I find this with myself, because we've all kind of switched to this virtual world, it also creates this feeling that we are available at any and all times. And so I know for myself, I let my colleagues know, generally if it's the weekend, I'm not going to be on. I have to take that time off to recharge myself and to get out with my family. And so everyone needs to be really mindful of their boundaries. I know working with a lot of the helpers within the schools, the family advocates, the counselors, this is a really hard time, and they're taking on a lot of that emotion from kids. So for them to have clear boundaries of what they can and can't do. And we just talk about kind and firm, right? That we have to really have those pieces in when we're setting boundaries. And then thinking about with our SEL, how when you get back, and we'll show you in our model plan what this can look like, but how are you going to build those daily core skills? If you look, I just pulled a couple of these out of the Character Strong, to kind of speak to different grade levels. So for 6th grade, core 1, relationship building, and they've got the great closer look activity where we look at how we're the same and how we're different from one another. Empathy building with 8th grade, and it's got the, I'm going to say this wrong, perspectacles activity. And then, 10th grade active listening. And I love that this one is still showing up in higher grades where we start to assume by 10th grade, don't they know how to show active listening? No, not actually. So it's a skill we need to go back to. And for our adults, it goes back to that core serve model. So if you're already using Character Strong, you know this. If you're not using Character Strong, that's an acronym, right? For that we start intentionally is the S, every day at the door with kids. So that's our 4 at the door plus 1 more were the ways we're greeting kids. And that 1 more is that kind of do now or warm up sponge activity. How we engage relationally with kids, doing those temperature checks with kids. How are those kids really doing? Responding with empathy. So as we have low level behaviors and we can anticipate seeing a rise in this related to the trauma and anxiety that we're going to see, it's responding with empathy and care when we're seeing those with students. The V is our values practice, and this is where our character dares come in and give us time to actually model what we want to see with kids and have kids and families take on those character dares. And then the E is exit intentionally, and it uses another acronym called EMR, which is when I'm looking at my relationships with kids. So let's say I'm 10th grade, I'll pick out 2nd period for that month, and I'm going to examine with my kids in this classroom are the kids that I've got a good established relationship with. That's my E. My M is for kids who it's a little bit variable. Are there some maintenance pieces I need to do with that relationship? And the R is I really need to do a repair or restart with this kid. So it gives you models to start to look at. And these really, for me, are like the core practices the adults can do to support the kids. And let me know, John, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay. And then Bella's going to talk about then building predictability and consistency and why this is so important in our buildings.
Just a couple things to go back to on the feel-good list. Lori mentioned, you don't have to go back on the slides, but Lori mentioned, I think she said like not a lot of wine on the adult feel. There's definitely wine on my feel-good list, maybe more than it typically would be. So I just want to just mention that. And then the family character dares. I am talking to so many families and my friends and experience it myself. It's really hard to be at home with my husband sometimes right now. And I have those family character dares literally on my computer at my home office as a reminder. This is hard. I'm gonna get me some wine and I'm gonna pull out a family character dare and make myself do it.
So are you saying that at the end of any family character dare, you could just add wine and it would be like the bonus? Okay, there you go. So
true. And then for a feel-good plan for high school, email me. I have an example of one that I can send you. I just happened to see that pop through. Just email me. And I can show you, and it's your 5-point scale, and it's looks like, sounds like, and here's what I can do. And then I saw another question come up. How many? A handful for a little kid, 3 to 5. For an older kid, like I have some kids who have 5 to 10, right? Because if one doesn't work, we can try another one. If that doesn't work, we can try another one. Okay, moving into predictability and consistency, and really thinking about when we are back at school, and I think about creating that consistency for students. The nice thing is that if we've done our prevention work, right, kids are going to know that we're coming back, and we have our expectations, right? And we have our class expectations aligned with our school-wide expectations. And we teach those expectations when we come back. The thing I want to point out on this is, if you've got those systems already set up, how do they need to look differently when you come back, right? Because my guess is when we go back into the building, we're going to have some socially distant expectations. We're going to have some more hand washing, some more of those kinds of things. So what do your expectations look like, and how do you need to build that in before kids do come back to school? So that's one thing that really pops out to me for this. When we've got our school-wide expectations aligned, our class expectations aligned with our school-wide, what are we going to need to do to tweak those given the situation that we're in right now? And then what does our reteach look like? Because everyone should be reteaching expectations regardless of the platform. So I'm doing a lot of plan A's with staffs, leadership teams. When kids come back in the building, we're going to plan for that right now, and here's our plan A. But if we do have to come back virtually, here's our plan B. So we know what it is that we're doing now, so we don't have to scramble when school time comes to start up again. Mm-hmm. And Lori and John, add anything in if you want here.
Great.
And so really thinking about the behavioral errors, and this goes back to a couple slides ago when I was talking about trauma. Even if you've taught them all of last year, right? Go ahead and assume that kids are going to come back in a different space. So let's just go ahead and be on teaching even more than we would, right? So we can pre-correct, right? We can pre-correct. And again, the more that you can name what it is that kids are feeling and validate that, that is a pre-correct to a behavioral error. It's like the best pre-correct to any behavioral error. So really thinking about that. And again, having your expectations posted. What you have posted right now, are you going to need to tweak it? And if so, it's like the logistical things that drive you crazy. If so, you're going to have to tweak it, you're going to have to change the signs. Who's going to change the signs? When are you going to get them printed? Who's going to hang them up? Like all of those little things that we would typically coach on and we might do in a day, it's going to take a little bit longer. Right? How are you embedding the very best social emotional language and curriculum that is taught is most absorbed when it is embedded into your academic curriculum. Right? So what are you doing to, again, name the emotions part and integrating it right into the curriculum that you're teaching? And then you're gonna need high rates of reinforcement when kids come back. So just know what your plan is. I was just sitting with a team somewhere last week and really talking through what is it that we're going to be doing to reinforce plan A back in the building and plan B. Okay, what are we going to do to make sure that we're still reinforcing, and what does that look like? Yeah. And then we've already mentioned this a little bit. What are the expectations of the adults? They're the same expectations for the kids. I want to just be clear about that again. But really thinking about that first X, model the skills we want to demonstrate. Teaching staff now, like we have a colleague who's incredible and she does a lot of work with building leadership teams and administrators. And the schools that she's coaching right now, she is telling principals and leadership teams every week, you should be having a meeting with your staff to talk about what's going on, right? That's going to get them used to, and they're going to then be better able to model the skills that we want to see from students when they do come back. We want staff to be able to name it. Right? And if you try this, you leave and you go back and you try it, and your staff start to cry, it's okay, because then all you have to do is validate. I know this is really, really hard. Thank you so much for sharing. That's all you have to say, so write that down. Yeah. And then next, assist students in meeting those expectations. So it's that teach, model, reinforce idea, right? If we can name it and we can be solid as adults, We can then go and we can teach students and we can assist students when they do get triggered and they do start to feel something really intense. Right? We can teach, we can model, we can reinforce.
Yep.
And then the last piece, demonstrate that how do we demonstrate that expectations are important? One of the best ways is by showing, but I love using circles, like restorative circles, to be able to demonstrate and everyone hearing everybody's voice in this.
Bella, I will say it's kind of interesting. I have both the Zoom kind of chat going as well as the live Facebook. And during that last section, all the like on Facebook little hearts, thumbs up, where they're like flowing through. So people really loved that last section.
Yes.
And I'm like, what is that out of the corner of my eye? Oh, it's a lot of people hitting like and heart.
Yeah, and you know what it is? You know what it is? It's just that we don't set platforms for our adults to be able to express. We do not. And that is one of the greatest things missing in our schools, culture, and climate. We have to be able to do that. So if you need some work yourself on how to do that, just email us. I'll give you lots of good stuff to read and you can practice yourself.
Yeah, I think too, like this for me is about, do you have a corresponding matrix for the adults that helps to match the kids? So if you're saying to the kids you want them to use the sign in, sign out process for the bathroom every time, that's one of your expectations, then on the adult matrix it should say you are teaching and reteaching that process, right? Yeah. So if we want the kids to be successful, we have to remind the adults what the steps are to support it. The other piece is around then just this overall like school connectedness. When we look at the reasons why a student ends up dropping out of school, often what students move back to, and even we see students drop out of school that are doing fairly well academically, is that they didn't have that affective connection. So this is one reason why when we get up into Tier 2 and Tier 3, we use programs like a check-in, check-out or check and connect, because it's trying to get that affective, tying that kid back in and creating that school connectedness with the students. Again, we're going to say go back first and do it with your staff, right? If you're running restorative processes and you want your staff to be running 2 community building circles a week with kids, you should be running community building circles with your staff in your staff meetings. And we have plenty of schools that do this and model this. But that relationship building, you can be doing that right now through your Zoom platforms. No, it's not ideal, but you can be doing connections like that. You can be doing little note cards home to your teachers if you're an admin, to your students if you're a teacher, like all these little ways we can still reach out and connect and make those connections. The other piece is we really need to give teachers permission that when they get back, those first few weeks are about all these core skills. It's SEL, it's connections, it's having that time, and it's not focused so much on the academics, right? We might be doing some diagnostic academic work, but we're not going to jump back in right away. That's going to be a really hard message because we're also going to feel pressed to make up the academic time that we've lost right now, right? But with your staff, the more you can engage them right now in doing fun things, and we'll show you a couple of quick examples around that. And then using this time to focus on student connectedness. So again, going back to your mission, has this break changed anything about your school's mission and how it speaks to connecting with students and connecting with families? If you're not doing intentional outreach to those kids who haven't been engaging so far and getting on Zoom, what does that look like? Because we've got a variety of reasons why students aren't engaging right now, right? And some of that may speak to some additional family support that they need from the school that we wouldn't know unless we were doing that outreach. And then this is a great time too to also look at discipline policies and practices, because we have a lot of practices that we use that inadvertently shame kids or break down relationships. And if we can look at moving those out of our systems, one of the classic examples I see of this is clip charts, clip kids up and down, because when kids are the kid who tends to need to be clipped down all the time is that kid who's lacking the social emotional learning skills. right? So we need to be building that up. We don't need to be doing any of these practices that will really disconnect them further.
Can I just jump in here real quick?
Yes. Yeah.
I just happened to see a question pop through that I can answer really quickly. Example of family outreach. I have schools and I'm coaching schools on setting up office hours where families know they can call in. Number one, home visits for those that you know you can't connect with any other way. Also setting up, I have some schools who once or twice a week, they're putting a group together over Zoom where it's just family support.
Yes.
And they're there to talk through and answer questions. I also have schools that are making videos to send to families to just be able to talk through. Like I serve a community that's 98% Hispanic, and this family liaison worker said, I was talking to this mom and she didn't even really know she could take her kid's phone and put him on a schedule. So it's just like those basic things that they just might not even be thinking about. Those are all really awesome supportive ways that you can reach out to families.
Practical strategies a lot of times. Absolutely. I was reminded too, just because a lot of the conversations have been around, like students you mentioned, Lori, who are engaging or not engaging, and the many different reasons why. And even the conversation around, and I know that people watching this have experienced this, they're in it, but it's not always the students who we may think who are struggling most.
Yeah.
I just did a podcast with the National School Psychologist of the Year, and they talked about that quite heavily. It doesn't mean though that they're not. I mean, some of your students who may very well, but in some cases, they're not. They're doing okay, and it might be a student who normally is doing okay who is really, really struggling right now with this. And so just making sure that that paradigm is open of like what we're seeing, what we're not seeing, and how we're reaching out, and just that awareness piece I think is important.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. And because I'm driving the slides, I can't do the chat too. So I'm glad.
I know. I'm just
no worries. We're pulling all the questions. I'm pulling all the questions. I got a whole document ready for the rapid fire at the end.
Cool.
Yeah. And, just some ideas. So here's some sample restorative. So if you're running kind of those restorative check-ins, just a couple of fun ones that are kind of COVID related, right? So if you could leave your house safely with $100 in 2 hours without getting into trouble or getting ill, where would you go and what would you do? Or what are some of the practices you've learned from kind of being in shelter that you would actually want to keep, that you're glad you've been doing and have started? And then just fun ideas for online connections with staff, so. And I have a group, one of my Seattle schools, a group of us that work together where we meet every Thursday at 3:30 and just get together and do different things on Zoom. But I've seen a lot of these fun, different ideas kind of coming to life. And there's great ones popping up online too.
And I was just giving a training last week, and about 10 of the participants had to leave a little early because they were doing a parade for their kids as a school, right? Yeah. They were each in their cars driving through their different community. And they were in tears the next day. I had them the next day too, and everyone was in tears. I mean, that is what people need and want right now.
Yeah. The last piece we'll talk about real quick, so we have time to show then the 6-week plan as well, is just systems, right? So all of this then goes back to, are you examining your system? Because remember, that's what allows the adults to carry out the work with the kids. And when we think about those systems, right, how do we make sure that they're focused on prevention, but they're also flexible and responsive? Because we don't know yet what might walk in the door, and we need to be really responsive to that. I would say one important note too is that we've also seen systems used in a really oppressive way, which maybe it's own webinar after this, but we can see implicit bias really take place in systems. So you need a way that you're examining that as well. And then I would just say, when you think about that multi-tiered, right, our 3-tier kind of PBIS, you are going to have to ramp up everything you're doing at each tier. So when you used to teach, expectations really hard for the first 3 days, that may now need to be the first 3 weeks, right? Because when kids come in more impacted, they can't hold on to information as well, right? Because they're in that fight, flight, freeze. When you are doing a 5-to-1 positive to corrective reinforcement, you may need to do an 8-to-1 or a 10-to-1 coming back. So everything's going to get ramped up a little bit to support kids. and the adults. And then it goes back to these core practices, right? When we see schools where systems like this fall apart, it's because they don't have an effective leadership team with an administrator on it. That's a key piece. And when you haven't built a team, it tends to rely on one person. So John has been the PBIS person for the school, and now he leaves and all the knowledge leaves with him. So it has to be a team. And another huge piece is using data. If schools don't use data, they are less likely to sustain. And then, you know, just be forewarned that if you keep doing the same thing, you'll get the same results, right? So when you're examining where you're at now, you want to also say, do we know how we got to where we're at? So if it's positive or negative, do we know how we got to where we're at? And I already talked a little bit about the systems to marginalize and oppress. So I'm going to walk you through this. Now here's where we're going to come back and say, when we show you this, there's a lot on here, so don't feel overwhelmed. Like, oh my gosh, there's no way we can put this in place. We're not asking you that. We're going to show you that some of our schools that have done this for 10, 12 years have these brilliant systems built out. Know that it took them a long time to get there. So if you're just starting, your job is to say, when I see this, where do I think right now is going to get us the biggest outcomes to put a couple of these things in place? And then there's some core things that we would say everyone does. Number one, as you see across the first 3 weeks, really getting to know your kids. So names, strengths, and needs of every child who's going to walk in your building, and their real name, and making sure you know how to pronounce it correctly, right? So we see a lot of that misuse as well. Hitting those school-wide and classroom expectations really across the first 6 weeks. So you'll see these things are meant to kind of build on each other as we go through the first 6 weeks. And then you can see some of the other pieces that you may be putting in place. We know we're going to need a heightened awareness around things like mindfulness. Do kids know how to self-regulate themselves? Do our adults know how to do that? Do we have ways that when our young kids come in from recess, they know how to calm themselves? When our high schoolers come back in from the crazy lunch, do they know how to calm themselves and refocus on that learning? And then what are all the different connection community activities you're going to do as a whole school and as classroom community? And if you're already using Character Strong, you know all the different connection activities that are built in that you can use for that community building.
You know, Lori, too, if you
Yes.
don't mind, just real quick, I
No.
appreciate you mentioning, like, so many times, I think it'd be careful, like, the assumption that, you know, in a school might have, like, people don't know a lot of times how to do community building activities.
Yep.
Like, I need tools. Like, just because that teacher who goes outside every once in a while with their class and is doing it doesn't mean that we need ideas, right? And even the where you mentioned the name, knowing names. I mean, we do, I think you mentioned earlier, the family character dare, which is
Yep.
just proactive, like, relational things that you could do. And what I love about them is it's not, you have to, it's just an invitation, right? It's an invitation into a challenge. Well, the first week of the staff character dare, it goes to that name challenge. And I always say, I think it's such a very practical reminder, is if I'm at the secondary level, which I taught at the high school level, how many times have we been in that scenario where we're doing, you know, roll in the first week and we get to that name where we have no idea. And what do many of us do? Well, you probably do what I did many times, which is I just give it my best shot.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is how many times has that student had their name mispronounced, right? Yeah. And yet the practical strategy we provide is what many schools do at graduation, because we're not going to mess it up on that day, right? But yet the irony is we will sometimes for 13 years leading up to it, right? And that is when they walk in on day one, give them a note card, right? And ask them to write down their name phonetically so that you get it on day one. And maybe it's not even that it's difficult to pronounce. Maybe they prefer to be called something different. Like one of our presenters is on his driver's license says Ryan Coley Beatonhands, but he goes by Coley. Yeah. And so how many times did his, you know, teacher, Ryan Beatonhands, like, it's Coley, right? And what if we could get that on day one? So just going to, we need practical strategies. And when the stress is high and there's lots going on, we're not going to remember. We need it right in front of us.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. As you can see, So as we get into week 2, we're building on it, and a lot of those things are still a central focus. And so here's where we might be teaching kids about a strategy like a feel-good plan. We might be going into something like a zones of regulation to help them really to notice and regulate, or that incredible 5-point scale, right? Can I really assess where I'm at when I'm starting to feel escalated, or where I'm feeling maybe, you know, in that blue zone where I'm not quite awake yet, or I'm a little bit on the ill side? Do I really know how to support myself as a learner, or to let my adults in the room know how, know where I'm at? And so doing those check-ins with the kids, those temperature checks, allows us different ways to know, how are our kids doing. And then you can see we're bringing in some of that diagnostic academic work, because we're starting to kind of figure out how our kids are coming in, but we're really still not hitting the academic strong. My son's geometry teacher this last year, I kind of joked with him because he was also the cross country coach, and at kind of the end of week 3, I was like, hey, I just want to check in because my son's not coming home yet with geometry work. Are we missing something? And he said, no, I don't teach across the first 3 weeks. He was like, you should know that. He was like, I'm community building. And I was like, okay, I get it, But he could push so hard on those kids because he spent that front time. And so he had no problem catching up with the curriculum because he had the learners really with him at that point. You can see then we get into week 3 and we're starting to engage, in, again, building up our program. So maybe you're bringing in something like a bystanders program around bullying prevention. You're really starting to hit more of the academic routines and teach kids what does it look like when you do group work, independent work, pair and share work, right? We're teaching them how to get into those academic interactive structures, but right now we're just practicing and not doing all the academic work with it, right?
And I just want to plug in here while you switch the slide. Really, I have a very, very strong high school lens. I spent years being a high school counselor as well as an elementary school counselor, but longer as a high school counselor. And I work with a lot of adolescents, and really just thinking about how does this work with them. I have resources, so you can email me because I can't go through them all right now. But circling kids up in middle school and high school is such a powerful way to get them talking. And again, it goes back to that modeling. If you can model it and let them know, like, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, and feel comfortable. If you want to share. If not, it's okay. I also have teachers who I've seen do these temperature checks where it's not in a circle because they're not there yet. And teachers will do a temperature check on Monday so they know who to lean into, right, in that week. And then they'll do a temperature check on a Friday to see if anything got any better. I mean, there's a lot of really good examples that you can do. Also for high school, middle school and high school, CBT work around thoughts and feelings and behaviors. That's a really huge one that I do a lot of training with schools on to bring into support social emotional curriculum. So I just wanted to pop that out there really quick.
Yes, yeah, thanks. You can see here as we get in, there's the first one is just we're still building on everything we've done so we haven't forgotten about what we did in weeks 1 to 3. But you can see I might be doing something like a 2x10 relationship builder. So if I have a kid that still feels like we're not connecting, I'm starting to kind of worry a little bit about that kid. Maybe they're starting to do some more low-level behaviors. And that's where I can do a strategy like a 2x10, and you can look that up. It's a very simple strategy where for 10 days, I intentionally spend 2 minutes just getting to know that kid. Nothing about their academics, just who they are as a student. I'm slowly doing that relationship building with my students. That comes in with kind of that EMR, right? This is one of our repair strategies if we need to really ramp that up. I may be doing things like a whole group project. Often for younger kids, it might be something like a collective art project, but I'm starting to see how my kids interact and work in groups together and that different dynamics that I have. I'm shifting in my restorative circles from me being the leader or the circle keeper, and I'm teaching my kids how to do that. So they're now taking more of that leadership role, right? And so you can see as you start to look as these weeks build, right, we're putting more and more in as we go. And then you can see where we start to bring in some more of the academic work, right? We're starting some basic academic. We're increasing that stamina for kids staying engaged and staying on time because they've come off summer and maybe have not had any type of routine. And now we're starting to kind of rotate them around through, rotate them if they're elementary, and for our middle schoolers are naturally, and high schoolers, they're changing classes. And then you can see where we might get into the last week, into things like having the kids take on a school-wide expectation challenge. We've been teaching them the expectations. Now they're going to teach us back. They're going to make door posters. They're going to make videos, different things that we can do for fun competition with kids. So thinking about all of those pieces, then the last piece I'd say is, as you look at all this, right, you've got to start first and say, do we know where we're at? So assessing. If you're doing something like PBIS, this is where you might use a tool like the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. You might be using, there's a great tool to measure staff socio-emotional awareness and learning that's on the Castle website. And we can send you these different tools, but do I really know where we're starting off? And once I know that, then what's the priority? If we're going to pick a couple of these things to put in place, what feels like a priority? What's the clear action plan look like? How do we get people trained? What does it look like to support them? And then we go out, we try it on, and then we come back and assess again. So assessment is intentionally in there twice, because our ongoing process is to come back and look at data. That's where we see schools often break down, where they don't keep a practice going because they don't come back and reassess where they're at and kind of update their action plans. So that's a lot of information. We have a couple of great websites that we send people to for additional resources, as well as the Character Strong website, which you should all have from being on the webinar. We do have a summer training where we'll expand on some of these. We do a summer institute every summer, but you can see a list of our topics that will be coming up for this summer. And then I'm going to turn it over to John, who's also going to talk about the Character Strong Summer Institute.
Yeah, let's see.
The best part is they're 2 days apart from each other, which I love.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's the info so people can pull it as well. Yeah. And it's going to be a beautiful compliment. I'll let you, people grab that. And then once you stop sharing, then I'll share my screen. But I am so excited for those that are potentially sticking on. I know we're near the top of the hour, but as long as you're with us, we have over 600 still with us. Then I'm going to do the rapid fire questions, which I think many people will find value from. Let me bring this up just so that you can see it as well. We will, let me bring this. There's a lot of screens open. There we go.
I'm the same way.
I don't even know if you can see that. You might not be able to, but let me see if I can pull this over. Maybe I'll go there. Let's see. Can you see that? Probably not. It's just a black screen. Well, here we go. I will talk through it and then go to the questions. But we do have, because I think you can see that even though it's small, but an implementation summit, August 15th and 16th, that is going to be happening virtually. People can attend from all over the country. It'll be a nice complement to the training that Lori and Bella just spoke about as well. And then we also have, just because I can't enlarge it so we can put it in the chat as well, because my double screen situation where I've got Facebook Live, I've got the questions, I've got this, it's just not working nicely, but that's all right, is we do have 3 upcoming webinars this week that are going to just be continuations of great content. So Tuesday, which is what, tomorrow, all the days blend together, 3 things that you need to influence children now and after quarantine. We're going to be doing that. I believe that's Houston and Tyler Durman, who's a wonderful man speaker for many years, who's in schools all over the country. We have on Wednesday, helping students navigate stress and trauma right now. And Houston's actually coming together with some students where we've been doing some stress coping resiliency, like video lessons to help schools re-enter, as well as right now navigate what they're going through. So something that would be engaging, relevant for students, seeing students their own age from different backgrounds, different walks of life, talking about what they're going through. And what we're doing is providing through the Character Dare process, some research-backed strategies, just like you mentioned at the beginning. Name it to tame it is one of those. And so each time they are sent off with a challenge where they come back and they discuss it. And there's 5 weeks of those that have been put together. So we're excited about that. And they'll be talking about that process. And then Friday, we're going to do an introduction to Character Strong for our middle school, high school, as well as our elementary Purposeful People Toolkit. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then let's do rapid fire here for those that are sticking with us, because there's still a good number. Lots of great comments. This has probably been our most attended webinar ever. So thank you.
Yay.
Lori and Bella, it's pretty awesome. Let's see. Here we go. So first, apologies for those that tried to get into Zoom. We're going to send all the info after the webinar, replay probably within 30 minutes for people that want to watch it. And we'll continue to increase our ways if you didn't find Facebook Live. But we totally maxed it out, which is awesome. Many people calling for another one of these together. So maybe we can talk, Lori and Bella, the same webinar, maybe at another time.
Yeah.
There's lots of hearts coming up on Facebook for that. So here we go. It said, here, some of these are going to be very quick and others will dig in more. It says, you mentioned previous webinars. Is there a place to access those? The one that we did previously and even today's is on the Character Strong website. You can go on there and under resources, we've got all of our past webinars that are on demand. You can click into them right now and watch. Let's see, will we get a copy of this? There are so many great tips and suggestions and all this. We will do a follow-up email with resources, so we'll work on that. So you should get multiple pieces to follow this up. Here we go. I want to have my team watch it after today. I think I already answered that. Here's one. Will Character Strong be adjusting the curriculum to fit a blended school model, which students will be in the classroom some days and at home some days? An added question later that was connected, that so many, not all, of my community building like activities involve touch of some kind. High five, different things that we've put out. I'd love more team building ideas that will be able to work with distancing. The answer to that is yes. Stay tuned. We are already hard at work turning those over so that you have ways that you can do each of those activities without requiring physical touch, because once again, we can still have connection without physical touch, right? And we can be working on those relational skills, as well as looking at how we're providing the delivery of our advisory curriculum early on, especially in the year, so that it can be done in multiple ways, including that distance learning. So yeah, stay tuned for more info, but we definitely are hard at work at making that happen for schools. Someone asked what's Bella's and Lori's email. I think it was put into the chat. We'll also put it in the follow-up so they have it. Someone said, is there a possible different term than temperature checks, as that might be an actual medical thing that might be a part of school entry? That's a great comment, right? And it does matter. So, I mean, it is funny. Yeah, maybe it's a pulse check or whatever. I mean, that might not be good either. We'll come up with something. But schools also could be thinking that way. I mean, what I hear behind questions like that is intentionality, right? And so schools should feel empowered as well as to take the idea of it. Sometimes we don't even say what it is. We just do the work, right? Of what actually a temperature check is by putting it into your entry task and or working it in. Let's see, here we go. How can we get access to the work that Bella and Lori are doing? Can you just reemphasize that? How can they find you?
Yeah, so I just put my email back in the chat. I know Bella's has been in, there goes hers too. So you can locate us there. Sound Supports, K12.com is my website. There's a ton of resources on there. I think Bella and I are both linked to it through.
Yeah, you can find me there too. You can go to my website, but Lori's is much more robust because I have a 3-year-old.
That has to be a regular part of these webinars. I like that. Okay, so I love that. Why is it so incredibly important that we make time for the relational work and social emotional learning as the #1 thing at the tier 1 level? Maybe just give the rapid fire.
Because that's what makes kids feel safe. And when kids feel safe, they take chances. When they take chances, they're going to learn more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's connection before content is what I always say. You have to have that connection.
So good. And I thought this was an interesting comment / question. It's like, it's interesting how in the past, before COVID-19, so many times we would hear about this work, and some that are maybe more uncomfortable would call it like touchy-feely. Yep. Which I always say, does that mean that it's bad? And nobody ever really argues with that. Like, no, it's good. Well, and it's interesting now how much it's needed.
Yeah.
right? Like what if we were already doing the work and wading into that discomfort, right? How do you make something more comfortable? Repetition, practice, we have to do it again. Well, those that were already doing the work, how much more prepared are they going to be now for the work when they need it, because they didn't bow out when it was touchy-feely, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It says, how do I get the to-do list that you were, I think it said, how do I get Bella's to-do list she is creating?
Yeah, just email me.
Yeah.
Perfect. It said, so lots of this can easily be done with elementary and middle, but sometimes high schoolers can be a little bit more resistant to sharing their feelings. What are some ways to really reach those high school students without making it feel like a kid activity? I'll quickly just give 2 cents and then please add in one. For our high school curricula, it was specifically designed for a high school student from many high school educators who have actually worked with high school students before. I think the other thing is it has to be repetition. It can't be a one assembly. It can't be a one kindness week where we encourage these like connection things. It needs to be something that over time is a part of your system, where gradually they become more comfortable with it. Because my experience being at the high school level and teaching 5 of these classes every day for 10 years is this: students actually want to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We just need to give them opportunities to do it. And my experience would say that it's usually more the comfort of the adult than it is the students, which means we have to do the adult work first.
Done. But enough said. There you go.
Let's see. Okay, can you post the link to the 5-point scale system? It might have got posted in the chat during, but somebody mentioned that. I think you had talked about the 5-point scale.
I can grab it.
And someone mentioned at high school, I use 5-point scale with all my high schoolers.
Perfect. And we can add in even in the follow-up to this, which with so many people, we'll make sure that there's a good follow-up coming out. It says, not to minimize, but do you see the impact of COVID-19 having less of an impact on children from smaller rural areas, such as in North Carolina, as opposed to children in New York City? I mean, I don't know if I can specifically answer to that, but I do know that different communities are experiencing different levels. For sure. I want to honor every question that came in, but that might not be for us to answer specifically. I want more specific data. I'd like a more simple emoji chart with 10 or less. Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Can you explain how the daily check-in works in a high school environment where kids travel to 6 different classrooms a day? Are they checking in with each teacher each period? How do they do it? Post it, electronic somehow? We teach to this a lot. You have to be intentional with your system. I always say if it's like every day, every period, every teacher, it's going to get old real fast. So for our schools, we always talk about at a minimum once a week as a school system, and they might pick a period where at a minimum that's happening. Then empowering teachers when they feel like it's needed, right? Like they can always do it themselves when they need a pulse on their class. But at least then that way there's more proactive. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Lori and Bella, but for us, the dosage is at least once a week as a school system that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like you said, being intentional about setting that system up, that's the key. And that's what people miss the most.
Yeah, a lot of my schools will even do like a kind of a check-in with a follow-up connection circle on Mondays, so they might do it during that advisory time. And that's just a way to see how kids are coming back in for the week. But then, as you said, if it seems like a lot of my kids, when they're coming in the classroom, kind of feel like things are a little bit off, I might do just a quick check. If you wouldn't mind just holding up a finger, 1 to 5. Well, with high schoolers, you might get the one wrong finger, but how are you doing as you come in the door?
Yep. And you could answer, you could do it different ways. You can do it by post-it note or note card or electronic, right? The key is if you do it, check it. If you do it, you have to check it. You need to know what is being put down.
On their warm-up activity, they can just put a quick note. Yeah.
Here it is. About how many items should be on a feel-good plan?
I think we could talk about this, but it kind of depends by kids, depending if they're younger. I think my daughter's has 6, she's 12.
Yeah, and I have high schoolers who have 10. Again, like if one doesn't work, you want enough to where you've got options.
Yeah.
One here, do you feel that looping with students from this year would help with the unknown for next year?
Yes, but that's a big systems piece. If schools have the privilege to do that, great, but it may not be possible.
I think I get the gist of this one. It's directed at CS. It says, what if one is not supported even though a school has the CS program? That could be a lot of different things that the person means. I'm going to take through this. What if a student or staff member doesn't feel supported even though they have a Character Strong program? What I always say to that is, let's really look at the implementation, right? Like, is it actually happening with fidelity? I talked about this on the last one, that when I ask a school, hey, who says we're doing Character Strong, and I would say, all right, what are you doing? Oh, we're teaching the lessons. Are you doing anything else? No, right? You're doing a component of Character Strong. That's why we really look at it as a holistic approach that balances and goes really nicely, braids in with what a school's doing with PBIS as a part of strengthening that collective tier 1. So I always would say to that, like, it's never perfect nothingness. So like, what are we doing to review, tweak, problem solve, action plan by using more than anything that team that's going to be needed at the tier 1 level. Let's see. Let's see, I'm an elementary mentor coach for a Title I school. We will have 7 first-year teachers. Any tips for these teachers? What would be front of mind for you to answer that? First-year teacher, what's the narrowing this big, lots of information we just shared? What would you narrow it down to if you were speaking, Lori and Bella, to a first-year teacher?
You know your expectations, teach your expectations, know your process for responding to discipline, and get to know your kids really well. Those 4 are the things that come to my mind.
Yeah, I would think asking if their school is a PBIS school and has some of those structures in place so they could know what those things are. And then asking some of these key, like, do we use an SEL curriculum? Are we using any restorative processes? Like, really knowing what the support process would be for the kids. Hopefully their district's linking them with a mentor teacher that can help them with that as well. But building up that classroom management strong from the start is key.
Oh, I know, I have a good one. Q-tip, Lori.
Which is quit taking it personally.
Yeah.
It's not
Can
about
you imagine being, I mean, it's already hard to be a new teacher. Can you imagine being a brand new teacher?
Yes. No.
We need that mentors. We need to invest in that mentor, like keep them in. Here it is. I know it goes back to one earlier, but it was one that I highlighted early. It says there's so much talk about, in quote, closing the widening gap with academics for our students and, in quote, catching them up. Can you address, please, one more time, how developing relationships will be worth it with the academics? It's like one of my favorite questions.
And I was responding in the chat to one of the questions as well.
I can reiterate again, it's fine. It's like, why is it worth it on the academic side? Why is it worth putting a focus on relationships and SEL when it comes to like closing the widening gap, right? And catching students up. So like, basically, why does SEL and putting a focus on relationships, why is it worth it on the impact of the academic side? Because I think that although that when we're in it, I think we're like kind of sometimes duh, but like you can't ever think about it that way. Like we need to be able to answer that strongly.
And when I'm just going to answer brief, and then I actually have to get off. I have to see a teenager at 12:15 our time. So, but what I'll say is, so much of the time schools don't make the connection of this work to academic success. And so first and foremost, making that connection with your staff. And we know from so much research, if a kid feels safe, I'll say it again, they're going to take chances. If they're taking chances, they're going to learn. If they're learning, it's going to affect their academics. Okay, I have to sign off. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Everybody stay safe and healthy and drink wine.
Appreciate it. Maybe, that last one, maybe. Appreciate your time. We'll keep going a little bit because we still have over 450 people that are still with us. Lori, anything that you would add to that one?
I would, I think when we think about social emotional learning, it's what allows kids to access the academics. So if they don't know how to ignore distractions, ask for help, show active listening, they're also not going to be accessing the academics. So I just think it precedes the academics.
Yeah, I always say too, when it goes to even the relational work, like students have a hard time learning from someone they don't like. Students have a hard time learning from someone they feel doesn't like them. And even though it's not personal, so quit taking it personal, there's going to be so many added layers, right, of what they've gone through where we're going to need to really go to work on that relational piece so that we can gradually be building trust back, right, and or developing that. And so we have to, if we want on a basic level, students to be ready to learn. And we have to always think, if we want all students, right, to be ready to learn, then there's no excuse. We
Right.
have to be putting a focus in this area.
Yeah.
Let's see, it says, can you give some examples of what it looks like to embed SEL in the academic curriculum? You know, on our elementary toolkit for Purposeful People, it's entirely built for that way. It's built to embed into the daily fabric of what they're doing versus a 30-minute type of lesson. And so there's all sorts of activities that you can use to transition from one academic thing to the next, or to embed into the academic piece that you're doing. Whereas I think what happens at the secondary level is that the more exposure we have as a tier 1 staff, collective staff, teaching at a minimum, even that once a week piece, is that more likely we will take those tools that many times we don't have and start to embed them. It's also why we have the adult tier 1 piece, where we zero in on a certain set of practices that are, in the big picture, low burden. We have the opportunity for high impact. That's then embedding it into what we're doing academically every day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. I think if there's any other, I'll skip past a couple and we'll do some follow-up, but let's see. I don't always think teachers feel like it's okay to show a moment of weakness, but it's going to probably be more needed, probably be more normal when we return and or needed. I mean, it goes to, you said you're a fan of Brene Brown, right? Like, people can connect with vulnerability. We're going to need, would you agree, need it more than ever?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. That's a couple last ones here. It says, there's lots of questions around family pieces. We can respond with what we've had. More ideas how we can include parents. We'll come back to that. One question, what do you mean by class charters? Would that be kind of related to like social contracting type of things, Lori?
Yeah, it's about how do we want to work together as a classroom community. So we really write that out. How do we want to interact, and what will respect look like when we're showing it to one another in the classroom, going through those pieces. So, and I'll go into some classrooms where I'll see 7 different charters across the 7 different periods of the day that can be created. One resource too I'll put in is just the National PBIS Center. I just put it into the chat. They've got great like examples of online matrices, way to do reinforcement for kids online. They've got a good family resource. So that's another great website to go to.
Great. Yeah, I think the last ones are pretty connected once we start going through it. There's, questions of the 6-week schedule and how do we convince schools that a 6-week phase in for high school is doable without sacrificing academics. We've addressed that, right? Time and time again. You're going to have to get that foundation, right? Because if the foundation isn't strong, right, it's not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to go as deep with the academics and or have as much success. I think that is it. I mean, just maybe end with thanks, Lori. Here are some fun comments. I love that you all speak to the importance of different relationship builders other than just circles, to allow teachers and students the space to build the skill and rapport to make it happen. Let's see. We had 26 states plus Canada involved. It said, okay, can you, thank you for letting us know that. My hand is cramping already. I've been snapping pics and writing simultaneously. Early on, they're like, are we going to get more of this? Because they were so excited and writing down everything. Someone asked about, is there a way to replay this? I got to have my team see this. Yes, we're going to be sending it out. Someone said, tearing up just hearing you say that it's okay. Thank you. Someone said, thank you for reminding that setting boundaries is okay. Another that said, I'm sharing these family character dares weekly for the entire month of May. I love them. Someone said, thanks for taking care of us while we're taking care of our students. Another, sometimes adults feel like praise is not genuine. It's just feedback, which is critical for success, whether academic or behaviorally, and setting the expectations early in teaching is so critical. Love that whole section. Amen corner over here. Someone said, appreciate you mentioning implicit bias. And I like that. Maybe that's another webinar at another time that we need to dig into. Obviously, I would remind teachers too that not only will a higher ratio be needed as you reestablish expectations, but also students will be surrounded by so many other students who are anxious. So the adults have to overcome the mass conversations of uncertainty. So good. Well, Lori, that was a lot. There was no way we're getting that in an hour, but pretty close to an hour and 15. And there will be many who will even go back and just watch the question and answer section. So I do think it's important. Appreciate the partnership here coming together. Know that you're doing amazing work, and really the number of times that schools reach out to us who are engaging with either our curricula or staff trainings on that tier 1 level who start to get serious and they say, we need to go deeper. And this is why we come together with partnerships like this. You want to know how to get even more intentional, deeper in that implementation work. Here are experts who are bringing before you, who can help you as you're digging into this. And what an important topic. Obviously, the number of people showed up today show how much people are paying attention to this, care about this. Obviously, we want to have as great a re-entering as we can. And we know that lots of fluid conversations are being had right now. So I hope that it was valuable today to get you thinking, even if you pulled one new idea that could be a part of that journey. So have a wonderful day. Enjoy the sunshine. Lori.
Thanks everyone out there. You're doing the hard work right now. So thanks so much for what you're doing for kids.
Thank you. And if any of us can help on the ongoing, please don't hesitate to reach out, and you'll be getting a follow-up email to this webinar for registering today. Take care.
All right. Thanks.